hi, everyone. My name is Kim Vu. I'm the Vice President of Environmental Social Governance and DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at Remitly. Remitly is an organization that helps immigrants make it easier for them to send money home to their families. And we are able to do that through the ability to be able to provide financial services that allows for making it more accessible to more immigrants everywhere. My scope at Remitly in the past 3.5 years is really kind of focused on ensuring that we've got the right frameworks in place as an organization to make sure that as we think about environment and social governance, what sets us up to be a socially responsible organization? And we very much intentionally combined and wove DEI and ESG together under the same roof, because it really helps us make really informed and equitable decisions, both how we do that internally for our employees, but also externally as we work with our customers who have very diverse cultural lived experiences and identities, and making sure that that also reflects in how we work with community partners and extended stakeholders, which we'll dig into a little bit more. But I'll hand it over. Erica, do you want to talk a little bit about what you do at Robinhood?
Absolutely. First, just thank you so much to Chai and the Women in Cloud team for having me back. I also talked about ESG last fall, so really appreciate it. And supremely happy to be sharing the stage with my good friend, Kim. So I'm the head of ESG at Robinhood, and I look at what we do from a corporate lens. So how do we perform as a company in each of the environment, social, and governance categories? What programs do we need to stand up? What policies do we need? Which areas could we be better in? Like, where are our priorities? So I look at it from that lens, and I have a ton of cross-functional stakeholders, which we will get into, because this work does not happen with a lot of other people at your company.
Well, just before we kind of get into like the thick of ESG, I think we might want to just level set some basics, since
Yes.
I think many of our folks who are joining us today may be new to ESG. So Erica, what does ESG mean to you?
Yeah. So we've shared what the letters stand for. And obviously, depending on the type of business you are, those letters mean a lot of different things. Kim and I happen to be in fintech. And however, if you are at, the last panel talked about supply chain. So those letters mean different things when you're a heavily supply chained company and you're relying on partners to deliver an end product to a customer. But really, at the end of the day, E, S, and G is about assessing additional kind of performance measures of a company in each of those three areas, in addition to financial metrics, and building those for the long-term success of a corporation. And depending, right, again, on the company you are, different pieces of that are going to matter more to someone else. And so the job that Kim and I have at companies is we come in and we figure out what is most important to the company that we work for. There's a macroeconomic environment and macro ESG environment that we keep an eye on and a pulse on for regulatory or policy needs or different things happening in the world. But really, at the end of the day, to me, it's about finding out what's true to the company that you work in and prioritizing those efforts. What would you add to that?
Yeah, no, I love that so much. I think it's like when we think about ESG and why does it matter to a company, I think it's so much speaks to like companies that take it very seriously and commit to it and really embed it into their business strategy, signals to all of their stakeholders that this is really important and that it's more than just about the bottom line, it's part of the bottom line. And there's so much, I think, research out there now that can really point to the fact that if you do, in fact, prioritize this as part of your business strategy and really build it in, that the returns on that is much greater, and really kind of speaks to like the term, doing well by doing good.
Yeah. Well, and that's perfect, because I wanted, we've seen shift in the last couple of years from talk of just shareholders to also serving stakeholders and all of our stakeholders. Can you talk to me a little bit about what is a stakeholder? Who are they? How do you work with them? How do you prioritize them? Things like that.
Yeah, stakeholders, I think, are so important to get to know and understand, and they vary depending on your organization, your business. But basically, kind of the general understanding of what stakeholders are is it's the broader set of people who influence and are influenced or impacted by your organization, right? So that can include your customers, your vendors, business partners, community leaders, elected officials, regulators, investors, the board, of course, your employees, right? And so customers really, or companies really determine how you decide which ones are the most important, how you weigh that is through a pretty common practice within the ESG world called a materiality assessment. And that process of going through the assessment really gives the organization the opportunity to listen to those different stakeholders and align your business priorities to those stakeholder priorities in order to really truly land on effective ESG strategy that gets you to a place of like full inclusion that really kind of speaks to how you drive to ensuring that you're executing on the mission and purpose of the organization.
Yeah, I would add to that because I know we have some founders that are here. We also have folks who don't do our jobs respectively. Every single employee at a company has an opportunity to be either a partner or a full-fledged member of the ESG team. I'll give you an example. Last year, I feel like every year it's like, which cross-functional team am I going to stand up this year for which initiative? And last year we were working with the supply chain team on an updated policy. And so we stood up that team. But I just want the audience to know, like, if you have an idea or if you identify an opportunity, chances are your head of ESG or your CSR, corporate social responsibility person, has thought of it and may or may not have bandwidth to help get it off the ground. But we love when people come and raise their hand and help. And obviously there's prioritization that has to happen, but that's just really important. And understanding who those key stakeholders are for your business and working with someone in Kim or mine's position is just absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I love that. I think what I would add to that too, in terms of ESG can be a part of your role, I kind of think about the same way that I like to remind folks about in the same context of DEI as well. It can be leveraged as what you think of as a lens that you apply to, regardless of what role you're in, to say like, hey, if I were to put an ESG lens or a DEI lens on top of my role, how does that shift or change the way that I make decisions? Who do I need to take into consideration? Who does this impact? Who's left out? Who benefits? Who doesn't? Does this cause harm to one group more so than the other? And how do you make those trade-offs, right? So it really adds like this really deep foundational base to the way we can make better ethical business decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was thinking if I wanted to add anything, but you said it perfectly. So talk to me, the macroeconomic environment's been challenging, and the tech industry and cloud industry in particular has, facing some layoffs. How do you, because you are also in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion, how do you use that lens, given the climate that we're all in and the challenges that we're facing?
Yeah, and I'll speak to this more broadly.
Yes, correct.
I think it's really important for us to I think call out and name. I think the thing that's on top of everyone's mind who's in this industry right now is to recognize that. And I think so much of how ESG plays a role in what we're experiencing today isn't necessarily in the what, it's more in the how, right? I think it shows up in how we make those difficult decisions, how we care for the folks that are impacted by it, how we care for them as we work with the individuals who are still within the organizations, how we communicate and care for our customers and everyone who is a stakeholder that is impacted by the shifting layoffs that are happening all over the industry. So I think a lot of it is around like, what is that decisioning framework that you put within the organization, and that governance lens, the G, which actually doesn't get talked about a whole lot, doesn't get as much love as the E or the S in our world. But I think that really strong foundational base of like, how do we make decisions and make sure that that's in place so that we can make really intentionally thoughtful decisions, that even when we have to make tough decisions, that we're making them with care.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually speaking of the G, I would say that my key partner at Robinhood is our legal team and our governance team, because actually, as Anne, one of our corporate governance fairy godmothers, has said, she's been around the industry a long time, there is no ENS without the G. Your corporation has to have this really solid foundation of ethical operations that's grounded in sound corporate governance practices. And actually, that's been one of the most fun things for me to dive into. The last panel was talking about kind of being curious and making sure you stay ahead of, stay into trends. And corporate governance is surely not a trend, but it's, I do think that we've seen a lot of trends in the ENS space, but the G cannot be forgotten. It is absolutely crucial to understand, and it really sets the stage for how a company operates.
Yeah, for sure. Like, speaking of trends, we'll kind of go down that path. Like, ESG's obviously evolved so much since its early inception in the 1960s. I think most people will be like, what? ESG's been around since the 1960s, right? Like, you're just hearing it now, more often in headlines and whatnot. And it's still continuing to evolve as we speak. How does technology influence these trends and changes within the ESG space around disclosure and accountability? What have you seen in your experience?
Yeah, so I would say I feel very fortunate. I'm doing the job that I wanted to do since I graduated from college. It took me a couple of years to get there, but I am very glad that I'm doing corporate social responsibility work. And when I started, I don't know, 20-ish years ago, it was really CSR. And any sort of ESG work was more in the financial space. It was, I'm going to use a bunch of impact investing, values investing, like there's a whole encyclopedia of terms there, but it was much more about investments than it was about corporate strategy. And then it was like foundations and giving and philanthropy. So the world has evolved to the scopes that Kim and I have as our jobs. I think, technology plays a piece because it gives us the tools to do our job faster on the most simplistic of levels. I think the challenging part for you and I, is figuring out which tools come at the right time. There is an enormous influx of measurement and reporting and analysis tools, and I certainly do not need them all. And so just making sure that you onboard the right ones at the right time to give you the outcomes that you're driving for. I think that's the key to this work, is really focusing on outcomes. But I know you had some thoughts on that from your DEI work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And from our DEI work, which now feeds into a lot of our ESG disclosure work as well. I think one of the examples of how I think we've continued to see the evolution of technology being applied to really help us get to being able to understand our workforce, which is a huge piece of the S in ESG, is work that we've invested in to really strengthen the tech stack within the people analytics space through partnerships with companies like ChartHop and Included, which has really kind of helped us build out the dashboards and the reports to really help us really understand the real-time changing demographics of our workforce across the globe. So how is the movement of women or individuals who have experiences as women are moving through the organization, both through the pipeline on the front end, but also through retention or attrition through the back end, right? Like, it's really important for us to really have that real-time scope of understanding in order to be able to make the right decisions in terms of how we support all of our employees, regardless of the varied identities and experiences that they're bringing to our organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know we're at time, so I wanted to we'll wrap up with final thoughts. One, someone's asking about internship opportunities. We at Robinhood actually have a summer internship opportunity that will be coming online soon for an undergrad to work, meet with me. Our team, it's our external affairs team. So we work with all of our external stakeholders. So one, yes. And yes, there are more of them. the thing I would say about kind of anyone has the opportunity to be a part of ESG, like what action could you take if you're interested in any of this? First, I do think ESG and sustainability are a little interchangeable, but I would say that they are different things. So I've taken if you're interested in kind of board service or later on in your career, I took a class called Through Competent Boards. Berkeley and a lot of other in universities have global programs for ESG that you can join that are not that really quite reasonable, and see if your company would even sponsor or has a benefit for ongoing education. LinkedIn just launched a whole sustainability track to teach you about climate change and also about kind of company awareness of that. Seth Godin actually leads it. I think there's over 1,000 courses now. So, and then there's a whole bunch of things I'm not mentioning. But Kim, do you have any next steps for anyone?
Yeah, I think just to add to that is that, again, I think like there's a couple of different pathways. There's so many different pathways and avenues to like incorporate ESG into your career. I mean, there's the obvious one of like actually making the pivot directly into the functions of ESG, right? And even in that space, there's a lot of different avenues to take. But I think even as I want to emphasize it because we just mentioned it earlier too, is regardless of the role that you sit in or the level that you are in within your organization, ESG can easily be applied as a lens to your work, right? Because it is about like the lens and framework of how you make decisions as a company, how you raise, concerns around opportunities to be able to ensure that the company is operating ethically. So I think there's lots of different ways for you to be able to incorporate that into your work. And I think the other piece that Erika, you mentioned too, is yes, the ESG teams also really want that input and feedback. And most established ESG practices within organizations will have a governance structure of varying levels within the organization where there is the opportunity for employee representation on those different working groups or councils or boards and things like that within the organization. So I would definitely seek out those opportunities to be able to engage as well, because we need your input and your insights into our way of being able to govern through that process.
100%.